Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. We are in Ecclesiastes, as you know, and we're going to be starting in chapter 7. So if you want to have that open, we're going to be working our way through the end of chapter 7, and then just a whole big section that follows that. So that's what we are. That's what we're going to be up to for the rest of the evening. Let me start off with a discussion question about the entirety of the book. Okay, just kind of taking it in as a whole big unit. What do you think is the purpose for having written it? Like, why is it included in the Bible? Why did God inspire it? What motivated Solomon to put pen to paper for this? And why is it still there? What is its overall purpose, boiled down the best you can? Mr. Rod.
It seems to have been written for the benefit of young people
Okay.
in particular, so that they can understand what they are seeing in the world and in society.
Okay, I like that. All right. Particularly for the benefit of young people, to help us understand what we are seeing in the world and in society. I like that. It's a good way to say it. Other takes on it? What would be the purpose for writing Ecclesiastes? It'd be real convenient if the last chapter just told us, like it does in John. You know what I mean? Like, I wrote this so that you would believe, and by believing you may have life in his name. Like, John just says, here's why I wrote this down. Solomon doesn't as much come out and say it, but what do you think is the purpose? Eric?
Well, I mean, if philosophy in general is going to be this idea of like how to navigate the problems of this world. You know, I mean, so much of the book is about thinking about other things and about the spiritual world, but I think it's a little bit of like, hey, while you're here, these are some things you're going to encounter in ways that you should shift the perspective on them.
Okay, yeah, I like that. It is. Everything in this book seems to come back to like 3 or 4 key phrases. One of those being under the sun, right? That almost defines its purpose. That you just sit there and you go, it is this level of guidance given for life here, just helping us to see that clearly. Okay, other thoughts? I'm not looking for an answer. I don't have an answer. There won't be anything on the screen in just a second if you're just like waiting for it. I don't have one this time. I wanted to see what you think. The purpose. Barry, what do you think is the purpose? And then Gary.
Gary's older. He should go.
Well, what I'm going to say talks about youth. So I don't know whether that's a good segue. You were looking for something that Solomon himself said. And in chapter 12, the last chapter, he does say something that I think that is applicable. Verse 1. Remember also the Creator in the days of your youth.
Yep.
It ends up, it's not only something that young people need to understand, but old people too need to understand the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because the rest of that context, I mean, the next long paragraph right there is, here's the wisdom for you when you're old too. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's good. Barry.
I was just going to say, it's about keeping perspective as you are a human.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, one of the things that keeps striking me as we keep reading it is just the humility that it forces upon you, right? That it doesn't have to come out and say, here's how you express humility in your life. There are plenty of other books and texts in the Bible that would do that for us. But just one of the things that it keeps reminding me is of how small we are and like how pitiful and weak in some ways we are. It forces this humility on you that you just have to be aware of that. If you truly understand how life looks under the sun, you realize how small in that and incapable in that grand scheme you are. So yeah, that's my way of saying what you just said, is that reminds you of your humanity and your place.
I was thinking more of the balance of, between earthly life and the reality of the spiritual consequences. That you can put your hand to all the work that you can and accomplish everything, but in the end, that isn't what's really important.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good bit of perspective. Solomon would agree with you all the way, and it's a really good segue to where I am going next, which is this slide here. This is just a helpful, concise rundown, I think, of the 5 vanities under the sun that the book does give to us. This comes from Peter Kreeft's book, The 3 Philosophies of Life. That book is worth what I paid for it 3 or 4 times over. It's tremendous. But anyway, he has this rundown of 5 of the things that he sees as vanity, not only vapor, but vanity, true, like you can't control this and it will become a problem in your life at some point. And so I just want to give them to you to get us started here. There's a note in your notes, so you can put it in the margin somewhere if it's helpful for you. But number 1, the sameness and indifference of all things. Okay, we talked about that in chapter 1, that the earth is basically described in chapter 1 as this giant cosmic hamster wheel, that it keeps going in circles and going nowhere, Even the circles that it goes in go in bigger circles, everything is coming back to where it started from. The second one here, that death is the certain and final end of life. That is a vanity, because it does make so many of the things that we devote ourselves to vain in the grand calculation of how this all plays out, as Barry said just a minute ago. Number 3, that time is a cycle of endless repetition. Ecclesiastes doesn't believe that in the same way that the Hindu faith would teach that everything is genuinely just going in a big circle and there's no progress to any history. Just by the entrance of Jesus into the world, history is moving in a linear direction. Okay, things do change. It's not endlessly stuck on repeat. But a lot of what happens under the sun is stuck on repeat. And that's what that's about. Okay. Number 4, evil as the perennial and unsolvable problem. And by that, we mean both of the Bible's definitions of evil, both in the sense of things that are truly wicked and like intended to be wicked, and also things that are just bad things that happen. Natural disasters are considered evil in the Bible, not in the same way that you would, if you sin, be considered evil, but the word means both of those things, okay? And so both of those are a perennial and unsolvable problem. And then, number 5, that God is an unknowable mystery. Yes, I know he has revealed himself to us, and I am very, very grateful for that, but he has not revealed everything about himself to us, and that's the struggle. It's just that we don't know everything we want to know about him, what he's doing at any given moment, what he's thinking and feeling and planning at any given moment. And that is our struggle with vapor, that there's so much of that escapes us. So with those 5 being there, 3 of these are going to be focuses in the text that we're looking at this evening, from the end of chapter 7 through as much of chapter 10 as we can manage. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that that's coming. Okay, I saw 2 hands raised, Gary and Dad.
Go ahead, Gary. He's older. Yes, Ron. It ends up, even if we had everything revealed to us, I don't think we still could comprehend it.
No.
And so God gave us what we can handle.
Yes, exactly. Yep. About himself and ourselves and so many other things, and we still struggle with it, even though it's right there printed in one volume for us. We still struggle with it. Yeah, Dad?
I was actually going to say the same thing, that I don't think, we think as a struggle, it's actually a gift.
It is.
And to Gary's point, there is a reason that God has not revealed everything.
Yeah. Yeah. The difficulty is, though, when we want more than what we've been given, which is that's the perennial difficulty of humanity, isn't it? That's the whole discontentment idea, We express discontent in so many different ways, and this is one of them, that we want to hold on to that vapor. We want to study it and know it and understand it and think that will solve our problems. But it is the gift of God, and we have to learn to trust it as such. That's where we actually come around to this being a healthy thing. Okay, Mr. Rod, and then I'm going to pause for a second and reset for where we're going in the text.
Yeah, Dan King gave an excellent lecture on it 2 or 3 decades ago, and he said the world is broken. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes says to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because sin entered into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what God had, initially intended.
Mm-hmm. John Steinbeck has written a novel that is just an incredibly grim look at humanity's nature. But the title is so compelling. The title is East of Eden. Because when mankind was kicked out of the Garden of Eden and separated from the presence of God, and all sorts of things started to go wrong, he sent them east. And it was east of Eden that we started to experience the depth of all of these problems that Ecclesiastes is just throwing right up in our faces and saying, this is the world you live in. How are you going to respond to that? You need to know that's what it's like, east of Eden. So anyway, it's remarkable. Okay, that's what I had as far as introductory stuff. Let's get into chapter 7, but Ray's going to lead us in prayer before we do that.
Let's pray. Almighty Father in heaven, we're very thankful for this opportunity we can take to study a portion of your word. We pray that we're able to meditate on these things and understand them, apply them to our lives, and share them with those that we meet. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so I'm starting in chapter 7, verse 13. I told you last time verses 1 through 12 are what I'm calling Solomon's Beatitudes. If you missed that, you can go back and listen to the reason why I say that from last week's class. But starting in verse 13, consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life I have seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and a wicked man who prolongs life in his evil doing. So be not overly righteous, neither be a fool. I skipped half a verse there. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Okay, here's the way that I'm summarizing this section. Basically, this is an elaboration on the statement that Jesus made, that God causes it to rain on the just and the unjust, right? Which you can take as either a good thing or a bad thing. Because rain is good, but nobody wants to be stuck out in the rain. So you can take that statement from the Lord to go either direction. The good things or the bad things, depends on your interpretation. They happen to everybody. They happen to whether a good person is standing there or a bad person is standing there. The rain falls where it falls. And so some of the time, this is what happens in life. We like to reinterpret it. We like to say, well, nothing is chance. It's all the will of God being done in every single circumstance. And that is true to some extent. Because what seems like chance to us a lot of the time probably is just chance a lot of the time. Now, I believe that there are some things that God does providentially orchestrate in order to bless his people. There's that much is clearly stated in places in the Psalms and other places throughout the prophets and the Old Testament law through Moses' writings. So there are different places where that happens all the time, but it's not to say that everything that happens is the divinely appointed will of God that it happened that way. Sometimes time and chance and other people happen to everybody. Okay? And so if our goal is to preserve and plan and pinpoint all of our life's outcomes, good luck. Now, the Bible will give you advice on how you should plan and pinpoint your life's outcomes and what decisions you should make that will lead to certain results. But so many of those are not guarantees. You don't have a guarantee as to how that's going to go. And so Solomon would tell us it's best to serve God and trust him for both good and bad. So, the last thing, the one who fears God shall come out from both of them, from good things and bad things. Best to serve him and trust him in things that are good and bad. Now, the next section, verses 19 through 25. If you haven't read it, scan through it as quickly as you can here, because this section is about the trouble with getting wisdom. And this is an interesting take on wisdom from the man who wrote the wisest books in our Bible and who was called the wisest man to have lived. For him to say that even in getting wisdom, even in this thing that I have done, that God has given me to the level no one else has ever had it, there are still some problems in it. So before I dig into it, you tell me, what are some of the potential problems, what are some of the potential struggles with getting wisdom? Either with the process of getting it or with actually having it. There are problems in both places. What would some of those be? Ray?
Understanding the futility of all the things you've already done.
Yes, exactly. You get to the point where you have enough wisdom to look backwards at what got you there, and you go, well, a lot of that was vapor along the way. And I didn't know it then, but now I see it. All right, that's maturity will do that to all of us, unfortunately. Okay, what else, Jessica?
You start to realize how much you still don't know.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. That's toward the end of chapter 1. That's one of the phrases that stuck with me the most from this particular study, is when Solomon says, as wisdom increases, so does vexation. Because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The bigger you see the world, the more you realize there are holes in it everywhere that I don't have any understanding in that place. So yeah, it's a good one. How else, Derek?
I think the question you asked of like how you get wisdom and generally how you get wisdom is through experience.
Yep.
Which a lot of times is not very fun.
Yes.
So you learn that like just by getting that. I mean, sure you're now equipped with that, but you had to go through some things to get it.
Yeah, exactly. The rudimentary example of that principle is you learn to ride a bike by falling off a bike a few times, which is really unfortunate. But take that and extrapolate the concept, and it's so much deeper and broader in everything in life that in getting wisdom, you have to have the experience that teaches it to you, which is the rougher road. So yeah. Okay, so here are the problems that he highlights here, and I just think this is really interesting. He's very serious and open about the fact that wisdom will help you in life. However, you can't just listen for it in everything you hear. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about in verse 21 and 22. Do not take to heart all the things that people say. Because you'll hear a bunch of stuff that you think, oh, that was really good. No, it was really emotionally pleasant, but it's not actually that wise. And experience will teach you that some of the time later on, But don't just take to heart everything that you hear. Because, the rest of his phrase here, sometimes you'll hear your servant cursing you, and your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. Is that a wise or a foolish thing to do? To curse somebody, say negative things, to hope bad things happen to them, to slander them. The Proverbs are going to tell us over and over and over again, that's a bad idea. For the speaker, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. So when you hear that about yourself, don't always assume that they're right. You may not get wisdom from listening and taking that sort of thing to heart. And then the second part of this, why wisdom is not always helpful, is because there are some questions that are always unanswerable. The deep things belong to God, and they are deep, very deep. Deuteronomy 29. So some things just can't be answered. Okay? And that leads us then to talk a little bit about what can and can't be accomplished with wisdom, which is the last 3-4 verses of the chapter here. Okay? So take a look at verse 26 through 29. I need a volunteer to read this one because I need us to kind of hear it first so that my comments will make sense when I reflect on it. But 26 through 29 of chapter 7. Anybody want to volunteer? Alex, thank you, sir.
Okay, so verse 26. And if I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters, he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, I think one of the troubles with this particular passage is, especially verse 28, the end of the verse, one man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. And I think what we end up trying to do with this is we try to make it about men and women. Okay? That it's some sort of gender classification thing going on here, or reflection on the tendencies of each gender, the generalizations of how men and women behave. And we tend to do that, I think, because we know this is from Solomon, and Solomon had 1,000 women in his life, and we see the trouble with that, right? And so we're like, well, look at that. Solomon says, one man among 1,000, but no good women among those 1,000 in my life. Not what he's doing. Okay, and it just can't be what he's doing in that phrase, because look at everything surrounding that. He cannot be talking here about gender stereotypes. It just doesn't fit the context. What I think he is doing then is I think he is talking about wisdom and wickedness as the two women, as two different women here. Okay? And so what he's talking about, and I'm going to get to hopefully explaining that particular phrase, because I found it to be the most troublesome part of this chapter for me, just understanding this, is like, what do you even do with the second half of verse 28? And I think I know now, at least I have a helpful way for me to understand it. But here's the deal with this. He is personifying wickedness and wisdom as two women, the same way that Proverbs 1 and 2 personifies wisdom and wickedness as two women. Same writer, same motif. Okay? So in Proverbs chapter 1, you have those long sections where he says, wisdom is a woman who cries out in the street, and she says, come to me, all who are simple-minded, and I will teach you. But then you also have on the flip side, the other woman is the seductress, and she says, come to me, and, I have perfumed my bed, and I've set up everything, and you come into my room and come into me and lie with me, and then what you don't realize is that she's destroying you, right? That's the whole personification from Proverbs 1 and 2. And I think Solomon is riffing on the same ideas in these verses, okay? So listen again with that in mind. Verse 26, I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is a trap and nets, and whose hands are fetters, or like handcuffs, right? The cuffs that you put on the end of a chain to hold somebody to the wall in a prison. That's the woman of evil from Proverbs chapters 1 and 2. Okay? He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Fits Proverbs 1 and 2, and that personification of wickedness as a woman. Okay? Now here's the other thing. How do you handle verse 28? One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Okay, here's what I think he's saying in verse 28. I think he is saying, I have found one wise man among 1,000, but I'm still in pursuit of the true Lady Wisdom. I have figured out a lot, he says. But the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. I am still in pursuit of this Lady Wisdom. Now, I've seen a lot of men that have pursued the other lady, the lady of wickedness, and she has consumed their lives. But I'm still in pursuit of this Lady Wisdom, and I don't think I'll ever get there. I don't think I'll do that while I'm still under the sun. And so, God's design is utterly perfect, but we are foolish and we are wicked, and so we are not good and we are not perfectly wise. And that's the struggle that he's pointing out there at the end of the chapter. Is that helpful? Does that make that passage read a little bit more easily? Okay. Hang on to the notes. Read it again later. See if you think it fits. If you don't think it fits, send me a message and we'll talk a little bit more. Okay? All right, let me move into chapter 8 then. If anybody got any thoughts on the end of chapter 7 before I move on. You have a green light. You better hit the gas while you have a green light. Okay, it's red. Here we go. Chapter 8. And here's what I'm going to do. From chapter 8 through 10, I've given all of these matching headings, and I think they all work really well here. This is how I would outline it if I was preaching it as a sermon, to make them all have matching headings. And so here's the first one. The first one is verses 1 through 9. Human power works against us. And from here to the end of chapter 10, I'm going to be showing you how Solomon is talking about different things that work against us. All these different things are working against us, and we need to have the wisdom to see that. Okay, so human power works against us. This section gives us wisdom for dealing with kings, for standing in front of government officials, and for having to deal with basically the civil government that's always present in the lives in our lives, okay, in the lives of humanity. So number one, learning to deal with kings includes keeping his commands, period. You want to stay on his good side, you want to make your life a little bit longer, obey what the king says. No surprise there. Verse 3 talks about not seeming and not being suspicious in the view of the king. So that's what he's talking about when he says, don't be quick to rush out of the presence of the king. Why? Because you look like you're up to something. Number one, don't be up to something. And number two, have the calmness and the integrity to just be okay in the presence of human power. Don't look like you're up to something and don't be up to something so that you can live a little bit longer and stay in good standing with those in power. And then anytime you deal with those in power, just be thoughtful. Be deliberate, pay attention, give some thought to the things you will say and how you will behave. Now, the reasons for that come down to the ways that human power is limited because it's held by humans. Okay? God's power is unlimited. If God wants to do good, which he always does, he totally can. There is nothing that can stop him. He will allow us to interfere, but it doesn't mean that we have overpowered him. It means he has graciously allowed us. Okay? He is completely sovereign, and anytime he wants to do anything, he can. On the other hand, you look at the most powerful people that have ever walked on earth, and they are not unlimited in their power. They can do a lot, but they are still human. And that's what this section is reminding us about, that even those in the highest positions of power cannot know the future. Even those in the highest positions of power cannot stop death. Even those in the highest positions of power cannot control the whims and the tides of humanity. Okay? So I'm looking at chapter 8. I'm looking at verse 8. No man has the power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. That's point number 2 right there. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. What does that mean? It means if your king says you're going to war, you are. And if he conscripts you into his army, you are in his army. He may not have the power to control when that even stops and starts, and who's sacrificed and who lives and all that sort of thing. That he may not have any of that kind of power. We are limited in our power, which is why the last verse says, all this in this section anyway, verse 9, all this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Even a good king will hurt somebody. Any human who has power over other humans will hurt somebody. They will do their best, but there is genuinely in the entire history of humanity, there is one king who has not hurt any of his people. Father, you have given these into my hand, and all of them are yours, and the accuser has not taken any of them. Right? There is one king who has not hurt any of his people. All the other ones fail in some way to be virtuous with their power. And so we have to be reminded that life under the sun depends on imperfection in human power systems. Okay? Good? You see why I'm saying it that way in this particular section of the text? All right, cool. Next section, we're going to keep building on that same idea. This is verses 10 through 17, that speculation about God works against us. Kind of already said a lot of this, but it's just the reminder, and we need this every now and then, that there are things which God sets in place that we don't have the power to either predict or control. Now, we talked about this extensively in Job, because this is one of the main takeaways, I think, from reading the book of Job as it should be read, is that you're not in control. And you have to trust God in spite of the fact that you're not in control of him. Because that wouldn't really be trusting him. That would be trusting you if you were in control of him. Okay? So all that to say, these are some things which God sets, but which we don't predict or control. And these are the ones that are listed out in that text. I'm just going to give you the list and let you go back and see how it plugs in later. Number 1 is the future. You don't control the future. We would love to. We would love to control all the outcomes, and we do control some of them some of the time, but not all of them. And we don't know what's coming next that we're going to have to adjust to, but God does. We also do not control the time of our death. He does. He knows these things. And so we have to trust him. We don't control whether we get, again, the same example here, conscripted into fighting in wartime. That can happen. And by the way, think about that from the time period when this was being written. Most places did not have a standing army. You had a small standing force that was usually built into an army by the conscription of the general public, the male general public, right? And so you can just be a farmer, minding your own business, running a virtuous farm life with you and your family, and one day somebody shows up and says, this is your last day with your family, you're marching off to war and you're probably not coming home. That can happen to you. I know it can still happen to us, right? We still have a draft, you know. It's still there. We don't think about it very often. We really don't want to think about it very often, but it can still happen. And so this is something that you don't control either. This is just something that you have to trust God that things are working out the way they're supposed to. You don't control who suffers and who prospers. In particular, he says, we don't control whether the wicked suffer or prosper under the sun. Now, he's very clear about the fact that after death, you will pay for your wickedness. But in this life, wickedness may go well or it may go really poorly. You don't always know. You just don't always know how it's going to turn out. And so we get another one of these sections where he says it's important for you to eat, drink, and be glad when that time comes, because that's a gift from God. Okay? Let's see. This is it, verse 15. I commend joy, for man has no good thing under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. So, how can humans respond when we do not control God and when speculating about what he's doing works against us? Number one, we can just accept the fact that he's in control, that he's beyond us. Okay? We can also learn to accept life as it comes, including the gifts and the joy that he gives. And ultimately, you can already feel where this is going. We get to the end of the book again. How do we respond to the fact that we don't know everything about God and we don't control anything about God? We trust him and we keep his commandments. And we let him be himself and control the rest of it. Okay? Trying to fly through this just to make sure we kind of have some good guideposts for reading these concepts. But I'd like to hear from you. What are you noticing? What are you seeing in that? What are you wondering about? Either in what Solomon has said or how I'm summarizing it. No? Good? All right. I'm giving you the option here. It's like an auction. You got to be ready to stop the auctioneer. Okay? Especially the faster I talk, the more you need to be ready for that. Okay, chapter 9 then. We have another struggle here, another thing that works against us, and this one is the heaviest and the most pinpoint, hard truth of them all, which is that death works against us. Okay? This is the section that says one event happens to everybody, regardless of your habits, your beliefs, your religion, your life station, your virtue or lack thereof, your position and power, any of that kind of stuff. None of that stops you from dying. And no position in history stops you from dying either. There's no point, where it will hit in the future where suddenly they have found the cure to death. That is an incurable disease that is native to humanity. Okay? Except for a divine cure. Oh, I'm losing the batteries on this, aren't I? Thanks, Barry. They should be in there on the table. There is a divine cure to death, but there is no cure under the sun for death. And so one event happens to all, regardless of who we are. So, what he says is really interesting throughout that. Number one, that death will happen to everybody. But number two, that because of that, you should see the true value in life. That life is better than death. Okay.
That works. Thank you.
Okay, so life is better than death, which helps us to see the value in it. Okay, now this one phrase probably doesn't read, I know it doesn't read to us the same way that it read to the ancients. Look at verse 4 with me. He who is joined with all the living has hope, For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Okay, I want to wax eloquent about verses 5 and 6 in just a second. But verse 4, somebody give me a re-explanation of that phrase, that a living dog is better than a dead lion. What does he mean? Yeah.
You know, I guess really the simple answer to me is that life is better because the living have hope.
Yep. Okay.
Whereas, and I don't think it matters whether it's a dog or a lion. I think he's trying to, show a contrast, but it's the key words are living and death, not
Yes.
dog and lion.
Yes. Okay. So the dog and the lion actually do have a really interesting nuance to what they're teaching us, but you have to think of it like an ancient Jew reading it. But Dad's point is well taken, that the key contrast is not the animals, it's the status of either alive or dead. It is better to be alive than to be dead. Okay? Now, tell me the teaching that he's given us by putting lion and dog side by side, though. If you can think like they thought, what's the teaching? That's exactly it. That's a very good choice of words, Ray. The lowly versus the prestigious. Okay? Because we think dogs, and we think like Dad's English cream golden retriever, who is beautiful and smart and obedient most of the time, and just a really good dog, right? He is a great family pet. He could be an awesome hunter. And we just think, man, what a valuable thing to have in somebody's life. Not what the Jews thought when they thought of a dog. When they thought of dogs, they thought more like jackals, okay? Like anything that is sort of canine in shape and is a scavenger that eats dead stuff, okay? That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. They carry disease, and they're into everything that no creature should ever be into. So what Solomon is saying in that phrase is a stark, stark contrast between it would be better to be the animal that nobody wants around and still be living than to be the one that we all look up to as the king of beasts and be done with your life on this planet, right? The status of life, even at its lowest level, is better than death. And that's the point that he's making here. By the way, I think that should probably be a really powerful evidence for us to see the value in human life at every stage. And I'm talking about the unborn stage, and I'm also talking about the extremely aged stage. There should be a really powerful evidence in what Solomon says right there, and a really powerful wisdom to help us as God's people to always see the value of God-given life. Okay? I'll let you know the rest of what I mean to say right there. Okay? So it's better to be alive and low stationed than to be high stationed and dead, no life. It reminds us not, and then he also reminds us here, just the fact that we are all going to die, it again reminds us to make sure we don't miss out on the good things in life. And so go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, the grave, to which you are going. Okay, so that's his point here, is just to make sure that we don't miss out on the good things in life, not only because those good things are temporary, but because we ourselves are temporary. Don't miss out. Don't squander the opportunities to enjoy the good gifts from God. All right, last section, and then I'll let the bell ring here. The last section that I want to cover tonight is verses 11 through 17. So that takes us through the end of chapter 9, and that is where expectations work against us as well. And we've explored this a couple of different times throughout the book, especially in chapter 4, where we talked about all things being equal, this is how things would turn out, and yet somehow they don't. The race does not always go to the fastest runner. That's what he's talking about here. It's the exact example he uses in chapter 9. Races do not always go to the fastest runners. Now, a lot of time they do, but it's the times when they don't that make us wonder if we really understand how life works. And it's just interesting that he uses a sports analogy because that's probably the realm where we're most used to seeing expectations go unmet. You take an underdog that's coming into a game and everybody bets on that underdog because there's like one thing that says, well, that's the reason they're going to win this game. And pick your sport, whatever we're talking about, whether it's individual sports or team sports. We bet on that underdog because we just love to see them win. Well, that's great, but the fact that we even know who the underdog is tells us we have some expectations about this game, don't we? And then, a lot of times, those expectations play out perfectly. Other times, Patrick Mahomes has the flu and he loses a throwaway game. Happens. We saw it just this year. So it's just one of those things that life tends to work like that. It makes a great metaphor because the world is full of all kinds of upsets. It's full of all sorts of things where you'll see a report on a random Tuesday morning on Good Morning America that so-and-so guy from so-and-so town who was 41 years old and in the best health of anybody in his town dropped dead at the end of his run from a heart attack, and his heart, turns out a bunch of the arteries around his heart were clogged with plaque. Nobody knew. They weren't even doing scans on this guy because everything looks like we wouldn't do that, but the world is full of random things that happen like that. It just shows us that the expectations that we have are not always right. Matter of fact, a lot of the time they're not right. Add to that this one, which is just such a compelling little story here. I'm going to read it and then I'll quit. But verse 14 through 16. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. Well, you know exactly how that's going to go, don't you? It's a little city. It's a great king. He's building siege works against this. There's no way they come out of this. There's no way they survive. Verse 15. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. Why? Why is that possible? Because sometimes the wisest sages in the world are obscured in plain sight. They live among us. We never recognize them. Anybody ever read that book, The Millionaire Next Door? It's just telling you about how many different millionaires there are in the world and in America that are just living in the house on your street. They do not all live in the mansion neighborhood that you think they live in. They live on your street, And it's the same kind of thing. The wisest people in the world are not necessarily the university professors. That's where you think academia and intelligence would live, and it just doesn't always happen that way. The wisest people in the world are the poor men in a small city who can save their city, and no one will ever know their name. But the wisdom that's there is a gift from God. Even when we deny it, it is still a gift from God that He has given us by His grace. And so that's where we kind of finish chapter 9. That leaves us for chapters 10, 11, and 12 next week. Please take the time to read those. That's it. You guys can come on in. Thanks for waiting, guys. I appreciate it.